Welcome to Still Untitled, the Adam Savage Project. I'm Will. I'm here with Adam. Hi.
Hello.
Norman's here.
Hi.
Today, we're talking about books.
We
just did it.
we were spontaneously talking about books for the last 20 minutes, and we figured we might as well turn on the microphone and actually record this.
Norm says, hey, we should make a podcast of this.
The summer reading list after the summer.
Post early fall summer reading list.
So you have been expounding to me the benefits of reading Chandler. I've never read Raymond Chandler. I didn't like detective books when I was a kid.
Right.
Never got into them. Didn't like L.A. I'll be frank. There's a lot of things not to like there. You are telling me this is required reading.
I'm telling you, Chandler is completely required reading because many of your favorite authors think that Chandler is one of their favorite authors.
So give us the backstory.
So the backstory about Chandler is he is a British educated American who was about 40 years old when he got laid off as an accountant for an oil company.
Okay.
And had nothing to do. Decided that he wanted to try writing because he'd always thought about writing.
It's the way it always starts.
He had a particular bee in his bonnet about critical theory. He hated critical theory. He hated the way academia dissected literature.
So you mean East Coast intellectual elitism, and
which was the only intellectual elitism back in the mid-century, right? In the 30s and the 40s. So he sought out what he looked around for a type of American-based fiction that no one was paying attention to.
Okay.
That had not been sullied by any kind of intellectual critical theory. And he alighted upon American pulp fiction. And apparently one of the first things he did was he bought a pulpy novel of the age that was well regarded. Mm-hmm. He sat and read the whole thing and then read it again. And as he read it, he plotted it out, what the beats were. And then he wrote it. He wrote a new book based on all the same beats. Now, I think he threw that book out. He never published it. It was just an exercise. And then he began developing his character, who would become his main character, Philip Marlowe. He developed him under several different names in a bunch of stories that were printed in the pulp magazines at the time, like Black Mask, and eventually published his first novel, which is The Big Sleep.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. Don't punch me if I get this wrong.
Same one the movie is based on?
What's that?
The same one.
Oh, yeah.
That the Humphrey Bogart movie.
Yes.
Oh, I saw it last week.
So he wrote slowly. He wrote character driven, as we talked about on the podcast about Quentin Tarantino. And he often combined short stories that he'd written or scenes from short stories that he'd written into some of his books. So there are some clunky plot maneuvers. But the 7 books that he wrote, starting with The Big Sleep and finishing with The Long Goodbye, comprised to me some of the most important writing of my whole life. And I've read all of his books probably 5 or 6 times each.
And you said you literally have a cycle where you start every 5 years and kind of work your way through
on average so I just read The Little Sister this weekend.
Okay.
And it had been a long time since I read that one. I forgot how mean it is. It's a nasty, his characters are nasty. Marlowe, there's a whole long protracted scene in which Marlowe's meditating on the Hollywood and movie stardom and the events of the day, and he keeps on redounding to the phrase, "Criminy Marlowe, you're not human tonight." He writes about his main character in a seminal essay on detective fiction called "The Simple Art of Murder." He credits Dashiell Hammet for taking the murder mystery away from the English drawing room and from ridiculous wooden one-dimensional characters and, quote, giving murder back to the people that actually were capable of committing it. I'm mucking up the quote there a little bit, but the mood, the flavor of that line is exactly.
It just is. Murder's not highbrow. It's in the streets, and it happens to normal schmucks.
And he was a huge fan of the Continental Op and of Hammet's writing. And yet he saw something missing for him that he wanted there. And it was a bit of, I think if there's a difference, and there are absolutely Chandler people and Hammet people, I think Chandler is much more of a hopeful writer than Hammet was. Hammet, I think, is a much more nihilistic writer about humanity and the hope for humanity. And Chandler writes about Marlowe in The Simple Art of Murder. He says, in all of these stories that aren't about the murder. They're about a search for a hidden truth. The main character's search for a hidden truth. And it's
The hidden truth about humanity or
about
life
himself.
or about himself. Okay.
About himself. And he even says you won't even know what the hidden truth he discovers is because it's not yours. It's his. It belongs to him because it belongs to the world that he lives in. He says the story is the adventure is the search for hidden truth, and it would be no adventure if it didn't happen to a man fit for adventure. He says he is the best man in his world and must be a good enough man for any world. In one of his letters he wrote to somebody, he said he is realistic in every single way except for the single fact that nobody of his character would ever be a private eye. But there's a way in which the other things he says in that essay are so important to me about the character's range of awareness is always surprises you.
And that it's expanded or that it's narrow?
No, quite expanded.
Okay.
And we were talking about the Yiddish Policemen's Union and Chabon's long descriptions of Alaska and the gray and the snow and Sitka and the way the place itself is a character in the book. I feel like that's absolutely Chandler. He's doing a version of Chandler's talking about L.A. and Chandler, the character drives from his place in Hollywood, up the PCH or up into the hills or down into the canyons or Pasadena, and he writes about the sun and how it moves and the movie star houses and the manzanitas and the sounds and the gardeners, and all of this stuff still feels quite current as you drive through LA now. And there's a way in which he both loathes and loves LA. As you would loathe and love any place that both you depend on and created you, that you live. And it's part of one of the ways that I really fell in love with Los Angeles. I think Los Angeles is an amazing and wonderful place, even at the same time as I agree with many people's criticisms of, it's too spread out, it's too big. But I will defend it all day long as being one of the most vital cultural cities in the United States.
All because of Raymond Chandler.
Well, that's where it started for me. That's the seed.
So you mentioned Chabon and other writers you said are influenced by Chandler and even directors. What are good examples of that?
Well, I feel like when I watch any Tarantino film that he's a big admirer of Chandler. I know that one of my all-time favorite writers, Haruki Murakami, is a big Chandler fan. I think the Great Sheep Chase is an homage in its entirety to Chandler. And I did a talk a few years ago at DragonCon called 100 Wishes, and one of them was, I would love someday to sit down over some drinks and talk to Murakami about Chandler. In fact, if I could, I'd go in a time machine and drive through 1950s Los Angeles with him.
With Murakami. So let's give a reading list.
Okay.
For people. Obviously, start with the Chandler
I
books.
would start with Chandler. There's only 7 Chandler books. Like I said, I read The Little Sister this weekend. I'm a fast reader, but you couldn't plow through all 7 in about a month.
I mean, they're pulp books, so they couldn't have been. They're not 1,000-page tomes.
No, not at all. You could finish one of them in the time it would take you to finish a Harry Potter book. And you could finish all of them in the time it would take you to finish a Harry Potter book. I would recommend reading Chandler in order that he wrote them.
Okay.
Starting with the first one, Big Sleep, and moving to The Long Goodbye. I would not waste time with things like Playback, which is a sort of novel adaptation of a screenplay he wrote, and definitely don't spend any time on Poodle Springs, which is a half-finished book of his that was finished by Robert Parker, and it's not Chandler.
Half-finished books should not be published.
Well, I look, if I was Robert Parker, I probably would have jumped at the chance to be able to finish one of my favorite writers' books, but it's not Chandler, and so I was sad and disappointed.
So then from there,
I've been reading just tons of Chabon this summer. I read The Yiddish Policemen's Union. I read Kavalier and Clay.
Mm-hmm.
I did get a galley of Telegraph Avenue, which I'm
very
just
jealous,
finished, and it's fantastic.
Well, I'll see that this fall when everyone else does.
He has some descriptions of Oakland and Berkeley that are shocking, just wonderful.
I'm really looking forward to that. It's one of the first. It's not often that you get to read about the city that you live in while the book is current. Because like I read the William Gibson San Francisco books,
Yes.
20 years afterwards
Right.
before I moved here.
Yes.
So it was a completely different experience reading them, then moving here, and then thinking about what San Francisco must have been like in 1982.
Yes.
To end up with those books the way they were. I'm really excited about the Chabon book coming out. I think it's this fall.
You know what I've
Or
been thinking about
soon.
doing recently? I've been thinking about going back to my bookshelf and pulling out all the last 6 Gibson books and reading them back to back, because I read them all as they come out.
Yeah.
Which means that when Idoru comes out, I can't remember anything that happened in all tomorrow's parties.
But they're only loosely connected. I mean, it's the secondary characters are kind of in the same universe. and
Yeah,
it's
sort of.
real,
Except that I remember I read Neuromancer,
Count Zero
Count
and-
Zero, and Mona Lisa Overdrive all back to back, and that felt really important to me. And I
Yeah.
wanted to see if, well, I mean, I love Spook Country so much, and there's a new one, right?
all 3 of those are out. So it's Pattern Recognition, Spook Country, and then I can't remember the last one.
Okay,
but-
so I read Pattern Recognition. I barely remember because it's been a while. Spook Country super influenced me. I'm dying to reread it.
See, it's funny because I loved Pattern Recognition, blew me away. I put it down. I didn't really like Spook Country when I read it at first. And the third one ties everything together. And Spook Country is a much better novel after reading Spook
Okay.
Country, after reading the third book.
All right, so
But those are those are completely on their own.
I also just finished the latest Dave Eggers book, A Hologram for the King.
Okay.
I picked that up in the airport on Thursday evening, and it's a quick
Oh,
read.
it's about the bicycle.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Company. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I'm a huge Eggers fan. I've read them. I've read everything. I'm sort of annoyed at how prolific he is.
So Eggers is when Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius was going around, I
Yeah.
picked that up and I read the first third, maybe half.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm okay. I'm
Oh,
good. I
no.
backed away.
Too precious.
See, there's a bit.
It was the footnotes. It was the ridiculous opening footnotes. Seemed to, I don't know.
Yeah.
I love the thing is I love what Dave Eggers does and what he is.
Yes.
But I didn't like the book. So
Okay.
you gave me a recommendation a minute ago. I'll go back and hit that.
I would
again.
also try and reread it. I mean, look, there's a lot of my favorite authors whose books, like I've read a ton of Jonathan Lethem, and I finished Motherless Brooklyn,
Okay.
which I don't know if you've read.
Never read
Okay,
that.
Motherless Brooklyn is a detective story in which the main character, your narrator, has Tourette's,
Oh no.
and he's a detective.
Cursing Tourette's or verbal Tourette's?
Verbal
Okay.
cursing Tourette's.
Fantastic.
And he writes verbal Tourette's tics into the narrative. Like they happen, you're seeing them through the narrator's eyes. It's kind of amazing. So I finished that and I loved it. And then I immediately picked up Fortress of Solitude, the next book, and I got like 50 pages in. I was like, I can't deal with this. Now, 7 months later, I picked it up again, and it's one of my favorite books. Like
Sometimes that happens.
sometimes it totally happens because there's a moment in Heartbreaking Work where he's playing frisbee with his little brother in Golden Gate Park on one of those summer days when you've just moved here, and he writes, he completes the description with the paragraph, "Have you fucking been to California?" And I remember reading that and being like, "Oh, I love that." This is like that made me fall in love with that.
See,
book.
I didn't get that far. So that was it.
all right.
Cryptonomicon was the same thing for me. I read the first maybe 5-6 chapters of Cryptonomicon 3 or 4 times, and it wasn't until I took it someplace and it was the only book I had. And I pushed through that initial hump and was okay, I'm in. This is fantastic.
Yeah, no,
Brilliant
and
book.
once you buy it, it's like I remember reading Cryptonomicon like a lost weekend.
Yeah. It's literally you lay down on the couch and you look up and it's 2:00 in the morning. You're like, hey, where'd everybody go? It's
So
dark in here.
my recommendation for you with Eggers is to read What is the What, which I read like you did Cavalier and Clay. I read it. I paused for a couple of days and I read it again.
Yeah, it
And
was.
I really loved it. It's super intense about one of the lost boys of Darfur, Sudan, and terrible. You know, it's any book you want to read about Africa is pretty much one of the worst stories you've ever heard. But it's beautiful. And Zaytun is wonderful. Hologram for the King actually is kind of an intense book. It put me in a really weird mood. It's very, well, I'll say that he takes Kafka as a jumping off point. He takes the castle. It really, there's a lot of it that feels like the castle.
That's not. This doesn't seem like a real upbeat, happy.
No, it's like my recipe for jump-starting a depression is read a Charles Bukowski novel in a single day, right? Like grab Ham on Rye and plow through that.
Changes your outlook on life in a really negative way.
It's like Home Alone while your wife is out of town and watch like 6 episodes of The British Office back to back. And you'll just feel like the worst human alive.
Oh, you hate you're laughing and you hate yourself.
I'm so full of shit.
Yeah. This has gone to dark and horrible places. Okay, Raymond Chandler books.
Chabon.
Chabon. Kavalier and Clay is unbelievable. Everybody should read that if you like comic books and have any kind of context for the Golden Age. It's even better. Silver Age, I guess.
And sorry, as we're going to, and Chabon's homage to Chandler is, I think, Yiddish Policemen's Union.
See, I didn't appreciate that when I read that because I had no Chandler context. So I'm going to go back and reread that at some point.
Do that, and then I also read earlier this summer the new Murakami book, 1Q84.
1Q84. So that was my introduction to Murakami. I'd never read Murakami before, and that's on my list to go back and read through at this point.
Yeah.
Everybody says it was a weak outing for him, and I thought it was fantastic.
Outing. No, it's beautiful. You've got so much more to look forward to. Dance, and Norwegian Wood, and The Great Sheep Chase, and Kafka on the Beach, and oh my God, the Wind Up Bird Chronicles. Literally read them in that order because Wind Up Bird Chronicles is earth-shatteringly great.
Okay.
And look, if you've listened to this at all, you know that I'm prone to hyperbole.
No. No.
Excitement.
But find me someone who doesn't like Wind Up Bird Chronicles. There are scenes from that book that stick with me almost on a weekly basis.
I will definitely check those out.
We got some homework.
Yeah, lots and lots of homework. So that'll do it for this episode of Still Untitled.
Wow, really?
It was a little fast. We can keep talking. we hit a stopping point here.
No, so I would just say that it's one of the things Jamie and I talk about when people ask, like, what do you guys do in your spare time? And one of the things that unites both of us, there's an interesting thing that unites us, is that we have a lot of the same early reading history. We both read all of Castaneda in our early 20s, Carlos Castaneda.
Okay.
Not if you know Carlos Castaneda. Okay, so very controversial guy. And to say very controversial guy makes it sound like there's a controversy, but there really isn't.
Why was he controversial?
So what he did was he wrote a bunch of books that purport to be sort of an anthropologist's journey through a mystical training by a magic teacher in Mexico in the 60s.
Okay.
So that he went to Mexico in the 60s to learn about psychotropic drugs and their use in rituals for Indian magicians,
coming of age or that kind of stuff.
Sorcerers, right? And then he became acquainted with a sorcerer named Don Juan, who initiated him into his line of seers. And now I'm giving you the plot. He purported that it was a genuine chronicle of what happened.
Okay.
That is pretty much complete and total bullshit.
Okay.
And there are a lot of people that are very mad about the fact that he represented that it was real, and I totally understand that. However, I will tell you that I think that there are beautiful books as allegories for existence, and I really enjoyed the spit out of them in my early 20s. And strangely, so did Mr. Heinemann. I did not realize
bizarre.
that. If you ask both of us our favorite novel, the first half of my life, the most important book to me is Jamie Heinemann's favorite book, 100 Years of Solitude. How about that? It's totally bizarre that we both really love Gabriel Garcia Marquez's magical fiction, but it's every bit as good as it purports to be as anyone would tell you that it is.
Yes.
And then the other thing that unites us is that we both read voraciously. We both are constantly reading. Jamie has pretty much given up fiction. There's too much nonfiction. There's too much information for him out there, and he wants to gather it all. I still read a pretty even balance of fiction and nonfiction.
Biographies or histories or?
I do, actually. I recently plowed through a couple of Jay Winnick's books, April 1864, and God, there's another one about I can't remember the title, but it's basically about how the American Revolution went on to foment and start the French Revolution and was ultimately responsible for the downfall of Catherine the Great. So he links these historical events all together. And he's a wonderful, engaging writer. So I love histories. I love biographies. I love, I recently finished the second of the 3 books of Taylor Branch's super intense chronicle of the civil rights movement in the South. Again, I'm old, so trying to call up the titles of the books. Parting the Waters is one of them. They're all about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the South through the 60s.
You know, with the internet, if you have an author's
Yes.
name and Amazon.
Taylor Branch, all of those books are amazing. And I love actually historical fiction. Claudius and Claudius the God, which I was just thinking I've got to reread. And the fact that Gore Vidal died reminded me how much I've loved some of his stuff like Burr and other books. They're wonderful, wonderful writing. And honestly, with someone like Vidal, I feel like I know that there's real scholarship to what I'm reading.
Yeah, well, there's the East Coast intellectualism coming in.
Yes.
Well, very good. So that's a hell of a summer reading list.
No, that's the last couple of years of my reading. But good luck.
Yeah. Do you do like Goodreads or anything like that where you kind of keep track of stuff, or do you just?
What do you mean?
So there's a site called Goodreads.
Yeah.
Where you literally can post. Here's what I'm reading right now. Here's what I think about it. It's a little bit reductive, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Because people usually say, oh, you know, there's a lot of I like this more than such and such. But
Well, this is whenever I read reviews on Amazon, like you can read reviews on Amazon of Telegraph Avenue right now. There are people who've had advanced copies and they're reading them, and reading pithy little 1-paragraph reviews of books as important as Chabon's books is like, even if you don't like the books, it's not a format for them.
well, Amazon reviews are for. I mean. You should look at the reviews for Amazon on rechargeable batteries, and pocket drills, and
Did
flashlights.
you ever see the one on the 1 gallon of milk?
No.
Oh, there's a famous one that went viral a couple of years ago where, just like 800 people wrote reviews of a single gallon of milk.
I love it when the silly reviews, the 3 Wolf shirt review is I think the first one of those that I saw that really blew up. But when you get the ridiculous review on the ridiculous product, it's a lovely thing.
Anyway, I was equating your Goodreads with Amazon reviews, and I'm probably totally off the mark.
The Goodreads is more for personal recollection. I use it for personal recollection. It's more, here's what I thought about this when I read this when I was 28 versus when I read it when I was 40. And it's just a way to keep track of what you read.
Yeah, I'm not sure
we
I
have a website.
Time.
It
seems
I
like
have
it's-
time
yeah.
for a new thing.
Seems like it's not that much time, not worth that much time. And I guess that really will do us this
All
time.
right. Yeah, if you have recommendations for other things that we might like based on what you've heard us talk about, I'd love to know about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think between the 3 of us, we have very different reading habits with occasional overlap, very occasional overlap.
Absolutely. And yeah,
No.
I think that'll do it.
Okay, well, we'll see you guys next week with another episode of Still Untitled. Bye.